Millennia is a brand new historical 4X turn-based strategy game. Was that enough descriptors for you? But in other news, it's arriving to the Steam Next Fest, February 5 through 12, and so we'll all have a chance to play it completely for free. In this video, however, we're going to talk about it more broadly. What does it have to offer? Lots of new things to discuss. As I was perusing around looking for information, I happened to stumble across this on their website. They're publicly available, although at the time of recording, I haven't seen a lot of hubbub about it, so maybe this is some hot news. But more importantly, let's focus on what they've been discussing over the last few months, throughout many feature breakdowns and developer diaries. I'm going to draw on them heavily, and I'll link them down below. Let's talk about what makes Millennia tick. The first thing that we're going to discuss are these national spirits. You can see them on your screen, and they very much reflect the way that you play through the game. Alongside other things, of course, like its very important and distinct age system, as well as its cities and economies, and how you manage tiles. There's almost a grand strategy light feel to the way that it handles buildings and resources. We'll get into that later. Combat, I think, also falls within that remit, but again, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here. Let's jump back in and talk specifically about those national spirits. What are they functionally inside of the game, you might be thinking? Well, I can answer that. Thanks to, of course, all the information they've provided. These are small, unique, national identity-focused tech trees, and they also lean into domain points, which you can see on the right-hand side, all of the 5s. We'll talk about those later on, though. Here are some examples that they've shared in screenshots or in those recent videos, and you can see that each one is focused not only around a certain time period, but also a certain identity: ancient seafarers, naturalists, versus raiders and Spartans. And then delving deep inside of a few of those, you can see that the tech tree forms a relatively simple structure. Maybe there's 7 or 8 options. We spend our domain points to unlock them, and each one has maybe a specific type of units, like the Spartan unit for the Spartans, for example, a very obvious example. But there's plenty more at play there as well, including unique buildings and improvements. Speaking of which, this, one of my favorite shots that they've shared, I've slowed it right down, is a focus on cities, and specifically how these cities, or capital regions as they're often described, work. And one of the fundamental things that limits or indeed encourages their growth are needs. The larger a city gets in Millennia, the more needs it has. Initially, just food, stretching through perhaps to housing, sanitation, and then as you move through the eras, the ages, things like power, education, luxury, or information become needs as well. Meeting them allows the city to grow, and obviously when they're big and in the green like that, that is great news. And of course, we can assume the opposite is also true. So one of the challenges to managing the growth of these capital regions, these cities that you're directly managing, not to be confused with vassals, which we'll get to in a moment, is meeting those needs. And like in other 4X games, it could be met, for example, by buildings within a city, or by improving tiles outside of it. Here we get a glimpse of that, as well as how the cities, the capital regions, also have towns joined onto them, allowing them to spread out in a certain way, leaning that influence, gobbling up all of those tiles, to eventually, as I say, improve. Now, here's an example of a goods chain that they give. You could put a lumber camp down, or whatever it may be called, to cut down logs, providing 2 production. Or you could also have a mill, another tile with another improvement that the city will automatically send the logs to, providing you more production, right? Adding value domestically. Here they show that a farm where you can get wheat, which could then be sent to the mill, indeed, turned into flour, and then the flour could be sent to the oven, where it will be turned into bread. And each time you add that value within a domestic supply chain, you can see that the yield increases incredibly. Now, some goods they talk about, like paper, which could be made from logs, don't provide production. They provide a different value instead, wealth. So we also have to be a little bit careful about the kinds of supply chains that we can not only support by the goods that we have, but also where we want to steer them. Another way that they talk about how we can pick up goods on the map, not just by building a city and the massive sort of population needs that come with that, but also just by placing down outposts. This is an example of one with the dotted border around it. The outpost can potentially collect goods and send them to our cities. Speaking of sending goods, Millennia also has a trade system in place with both foreign and domestic trade routes. So you could have a city set up with lots of lumber, lots of trees being felled, but maybe not the space there to do the actual value add, turning it to paper, and then maybe that paper into books or religious texts. So you do that in a different city, using trade networks to do that. And these outposts also connect roads, as you can see demonstrated on screen, and you can choose where you want to send those goods from the outposts. So you could also potentially build up a big city very quickly, depending on how you want to distribute those goods. One of the limiting factors, of course, to the kinds of improvements that you have for tiles will be your technologies. And these are unlocked through Millennia's Ages system, a system they've talked much more about. Here you can see a roll through of the first 4 and the kinds of technologies that are inside of them, as you might expect. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see how you move through ages. And there are lots of interesting requirements here, so I'm going to play this again and slow it down. There are historical ages, alternate ages, and also crises ages. The Age of Conquest, an alternate one, for example, requiring the player to have a military strength equal or greater than 150% of their strongest rival. The Age of Intolerance, with its red border suggesting crises, of course. This one refers to an intolerance charge that needs to be built up. Not sure on that one. Next, Age of Discovery. To meet this special, perhaps alternate age, you need to have 5 docks, as well as some required technologies. And then finally, a standard age. Now, one of the other interesting things they show off here is how to enter a crisis age. And the game is basically saying, whoa, hold off. If you destroy more units that aren't barbarians, you will be forced to enter the Age of Blood. And it changes the whole look of the game. But let's just quickly focus in on it again. So they were warned inside of the very fast first age that if they fight 6 enemy players, destroying them, killing the units, that they'll be forced to enter a Blood Age as the future. And as the player moves through, the Age of Blood is revealed with certain conditions inside of this crisis age, and I believe all ages will have their own certain conditions or new benefits, new things unlocked, new mechanics inside of the game to explore as societies develop too. So that's our first sort of quick glimpse and quick look at how the ages work. You research through into the next age, just like you would research your technology. The first player to do it will lock the world in, lock in that choice. However, to get through to the next stage and actually have access to technologies, each individual player will still need to carry out a kind of a moving through to the next age kind of research task, project, in the same way that your science, or knowledge, I should say, will feed into unlocking those techs that we saw earlier inside of the ages. The ages also present some other interesting and unique things. They talk about the alternate ages. For example, here inside of the age of, I think it was the Age of Ether, lots of things are powered by steam inside of this alternate age. So also some ways to play, not just within history, again, sort of shaping your own nation, picking up those spirits as you go, but also outside of it as well. Now, they also, of course, show us there some stuff about combat, about units, not just about how they look and feel, but also about how they change as we move through the ages. Obviously, as you'd expect early on, it's things like bows, spears that take the focus. This is what the combat looks like itself. It's not like a Civ kind of thing where you right-click and move your unit into theirs and see some damage pop up immediately on the map. Instead, it's a bit more focused, demonstrated inside of these short scenes that you can speed through if you wish. Just don't watch it if you want to by hitting that red X, or watch through and see how your units in their formations, specifically defined and a very important part of combat in Millennia, actually fight one another. And of course, what you've unlocked, the kinds of units that you've built in your city, or buildings or improvements, the kinds of resources that you actually have access to as well, will determine how good your units are, alongside seemingly their experience, and as I say, their formations. Do you just bring spears? Do you just bring archers and have them mowed down by 1 or 2 cavalry units you run into? That kind of thing. The formation of armies, the structure of armies, where, when, and how you're fighting is key to combat in this game, it would seem. And finally, we move through to talking a bit more about domain management, not city management, but this stuff that they showcase on the right. Government exploration, warfare, diplomacy and arts, alongside knowledge and culture working a bit separately. These domains are introduced and unlocked through in-game events potentially very early on, finding those goody huts. Alternatively, I assume we can unlock them as we move through as well, through technologies. Now, they provide some interesting things, not just tech trees that you can spend your points on, but also these benefits that they highlight. Each domain leaning into the kind of thing that you would expect. So warfare gives the option to heal an army in friendly or neutral territory with reinforcements. Alternatively, this force march allows a unit to seemingly take an extra move within the same turn. Volunteers as well, spawning units. So these kinds of actions will lean in and shape how you spend those domain points that you're earning in your cities. It's not just spending them on those national spirit tech trees, but also all kinds of benefits like they're teasing here. So to not waste any of your time then, let's wrap and bring it all together. Millennia, developed by C-Prompt Games, here you can see some of their credentials on screen, published by Paradox Interactive, is a historical 4X strategy game. I liken it almost to a grand 4X game because of the way it leans into mechanics, doing stuff a bit differently. We've talked about its ages, 10 of them, some historical, alternate, or crises ages entered by the player. The national spirits that shape our identity, less of a focus on the beginning of the game, picking traits and what your leader looks like, more of a focus on building those national spirits as we move through. We talked about the cities as regions, these sort of capital regions, as well as the towns or outposts that might border them, and the economies and supply chains that we can build. And finally, we talked about combat, how fights actually work through those short scenes, as well as domains, warfare, government, diplomacy, engineering, and the points that we can spend on one-time rewards, as well as those national spirit trees. Thank you very much for joining me. Of course, hot off the press news that we'll be able to play this game at the Steam Next Fest in February of 2024 as well. Looks like it's going to be an exciting time. Stay tuned. I'll have much more to say about Millennia very soon.